table 1. If table 1, yeah, I'm not seeing it, but let me see. Table 1 will show us the summary of all the lecture. The lecture is concerned with what I have done with a general class of model called parametric models. The first one in that general class is economic models. Using ordinary least squares in double log functional form, we have made equations with which we could predict, and equations with which we compute elasticity, with which we could do business using cross-section data. We have multinomial logic models with which we have computed shipment time and predicted mode choice. We have multinomial logistic model of driver behavior, having estimated odd ratio. We use the odd ratio to compare to using sigmoid function. We use that to compute the probability that a driver will be angry or aggressive when he encounters a particular transport situation. The other parametric models are stochastic models. Then we come to the non-parametric models. Usually, models in try to make sure that I explain what is CAPI. Models are those models that have a fixed coefficients. And you can estimate them, and you can see the coefficient of the variable. And examples are given in examples of it. The non-parametric models have a different type of configuration. There are no fixed parameters. What determines their strength is you assume a distribution before you do the distribution, and then you end up having parameters, coefficients that say something about those distributions. Such parameters or coefficients do not exist in the case of non-parametric models. Non-parametric models, their values are determined by data. They are data-driven rather than being modeled. You assume nothing. You just use data on them. You can see from this table, if you are still looking at it, that we have in parentheses things like cross-section data, time series data, and you have also the one that causes many people, panel data. There are also slight differences. Because of time pressing me, cross-section data is a data that is done at an instant in time. At an instant in time. You interview a cross-section of the survey items and get the value at an instant in time. In other words, they are comparative static. Time series data are data that occur over a time period. There are some technical things I've written there about them. And they can be multiple time periods when it will occur, say in the past. Panel data is more complex. It has the feature of both the comparative static data, that is the cross-section data, and the time series data. In the sense that it has multiple time units, multiple units of individuals, and then multiple time units of individuals. So we can think that cross-section data is a composite of both the cross-section data characteristics and the time series data. And that is what external examiners used to get puzzled about. When our students say we used panel data, they're worried about when that one, what that one means. Now, we have already I've explained parametric and non-parametric models, and I've explained the data that we're using. I will not be happy if I don't mention a very important thing here, and it's written here that parametric that what we have always done, the distribution that we have assumed that parametric models assume a distribution and then a fixed value. I want to say now that the assumption we have made in almost all the models that were fixed, that fall under parametric model, to be based on the assumption of normal distribution, binomial distribution, Poisson distribution, and an extreme value distribution, usually referred to as the Weibull distribution. The Weibull distribution is what we have used, and we have followed the tradition of the University of California, Berkeley, using the Weibull distribution to model charts. The other kind of model that can be used to model choice is the Gumbel distribution. The MIT has the tradition of using the Gumbel distribution. You can see that there's no conflict, because when you look at the result, the final result of that resulting from Weibull and the one that results from Gumbel distribution, they are similar. So the academic community has allowed them. Madam Vice Chancellor, I want to that what we have used all this time is usually the Gumbel. In chapter 2 of this work, I've tried to review There are other studies. What have some people done different from what we are doing or what we did? And that is how I came about here. When you look at the trend of transport, how transport as a discipline is moving, how it has been over time, you can see that transport has been viewed as a network. Transport has been viewed as a network. And just like in economics, everything we do tends to an equilibrium. So in transport, everything we do, everything is tending to an equilibrium. But that equilibrium is taken not by market as in economics, but by network configuration. That is why you can see, especially if you were in geography, but talking of peaks and nodes. But the one you can now see, you see ports, seaports, airports, in the land terminal, you see terminals, garage, and so on. These are networks, these are facilities that are meant to bring an equilibrium in the traffic flow. So if you are in the economy, just imagine the equilibrium that is attainable when supply and demand equilibrate. That is the equilibrium that is attainable in the transport sector when this flows are so massive that the ports, seaports, airports, and all, they are all performing their different functions. That is what the original study, I think, was the philosophy. The philosophy they had was to examine, to do examination of transport without necessarily attaching the flows to a particular kind of mode. And they discovered that the Nigerian system was generally not efficient. The Nigerian system was generally not efficient. And I mentioned particular studies. The people who do those studies, if you have time, please read them later. We also have what is more important here is that those studies did investigation of spatial equilibrium, spatial flows, and I have explained why equilibrium in transport is important. And if you are an economist, you will know the analogy. That the studies are the spatial equilibrium by those studies was actually first formulated by Jacob Cookman. They formulated the transport cost minimization problem, the aim of which is to determine an optimum pattern of commodity flows over a given network. And then the dual, and I think you should hear that word, the dual of that network problem is closely related to the spatial price equilibrium along the lines of the Samuelson model. Usually, to bring them to operation, you formulate them in a linear program. And that is the point of it. That those areas studies, investigating spatial equilibrium, very good concept, ended up them into linear program. So you can say that they were kind of operational research. That approach is the basis of trade theory arbitrage model of freight transportation demand, which is a model of generalized interspecial markets along the thing that I made about before. Now, in the economic, a very fundamental contribution to that spatial equilibrium something was made by Samuelson. All of you know that Samuelson was a Nobel Prize winner. some ways it extended that approach into a standard linear programming model, thereby providing an important insight into the fundamental problem of economic prices. In the context of economic pricing in Nigeria, a candidate that got his PhD work under us formulated can use this system, this kind of summarization formulation, to investigate the price structure, that is, prices of the Nigerian ports, adequate and fair. And he found that it was not adequate and fair. The statistic, the extent by which it is not adequate is mentioned in the lecture. Madam Chancellor, you can see that throughout the West African sub-region, the Nigerian price system, port system, is overpriced. It is the most expensive. And that is the major reason why people ship their goods to Lomé, Abidjan, and the adjacent ports and try to avoid our own. What we recommend is that people we should, using this pricing system, we should find an equitable and just price for the Nigerian port system and all of them. The next item is modeling future transport. Modeling future transport. How do we estimate the future transport? I propose here the normal thing that we do, that you begin to mention that there is a relationship between the gross product and transport demand. So if you fit an equation that will capture the gross domestic product, you can relate it to transport demand. I have seen an equation that is written here. I believe that please next step so that everybody can see the equation. And that is the interest that I have in this lecture. The interest of that equation. Good. If you look at that equation, you will notice L. If you say L is equal to that transport demand, Y, income, GDP, look at that equation. The equation is standardized. It's so standardized that it is used all over the world. And that illustrates a simple thing that I'm talking about when you talk of transferability of data. This data, to use this equation, you have to do some small research so that you can adjust the exponents if necessary. And that is the exponent you can adjust, but the structure or the equation generally. And I think I should recommend that people use it. In the Nigerian situation, translating this equation means that the relative ratio of transport demand and GDP in Nigeria is about 1.8 to 1.0, the relative ratio. I will not add that if there is no decoupling between the GDP and the economy, if there is no decoupling between the GDP and the economy, that is, economists usually say all things being equal, then this equation can always be used. It is assumed that nature does not make jumps. If nature has not made jumps, please, you can use this equation. I will skip every other thing and go to the next ones. Analytical transport planning in Nigeria. And this is quite interesting. What is analytical transport planning? It is simply using some scientific methods of estimating demand, predict, and then based on that, to plan. So let us say that that is analytical transport planning in Nigeria. And I want to just draw attention to the fact that Nigeria has done a lot of analytical transport planning before. In fact, we're doing less now than they did in the past. Because at the time I was a student in the mid-70s, we encountered large-scale transportation plans that are mentioned here, such as the London transportation plan of Detroit, London transportation plan, the Detroit area transportation study plan. I also mentioned the South Africa, the Johannesburg transportation plan. These are standardized plans, very sophisticated, trying to measure trip generation and attraction models, trip distribution models, modal choice models, and assignment models using conventional and accepted standards dictated by international organizations. You might wonder, Nigeria has similar ones. If you look at what I mentioned here is the Lagos State, the Lagos Metropolitan Area Transport Planning of 1975, and then Yobe State Long Range Planning of about the same period. These studies compare favorably to any of the studies that I have just mentioned in Detroit, London, Johannesburg. We have not seen any of them again here. As a postgraduate students, we use the output of consultants on those studies to study transportation engineering and planning, to study design, and then the design of planning, especially in the urban context, and when it relates to land use modeling. What are the characteristics of those studies? Why have we abandoned them? We have abandoned them because number one, they're very expensive to do. In other words, I've said here that and the data we need a lot of data, and they're very sophisticated. That it is not easy to use them. The satisfaction with them led to what we now call direct transport. The economics were the people who now decided to say these large-scale studies are too expensive. The problem they are looking at is long-term, 50 years in time, whereas the problem that is to be solved is now. Why don't we define problem? Why don't we define models that can be used quickly, and so they divided the direct and demand models. I can see them moving up and down. So not expect me to do this lecture in 35 minutes. It's impossible. And we better please just wait. You can see I'm also trying to summarize, don't be afraid. I won't stop in 35 minutes. So people dissatisfaction with those models led to what we call direct demand models. The direct demand models encapsulate capture, generation, transport generation, transport distribution, modal split, and assignment in one, modal split and in one equation, captured in one equation. And another characteristic of them is that it's relatively simple data. And you can do business with them, even with low-cost data. I've written the characteristics of all of them here. And that is where econometrics come in. The direct demand model, the driving force of the direct demand model is econometrics. And the major thing that has driven econometrics in our own area here is discrete choice analysis. Actually propounded mostly by Mark Fadan. If you remember, Mark Fadan also won a Nobel Prize in economics for doing this. Mark Fadan drew his inspiration from outside economics. If you look at here, mostly from psychology. We mentioned people like Tversky, Thurston, Luz and Suters, and all those. Using even biology, biometric people were also very strong in this. What is the difference between these ones, psychology, psychometrics, psychology, choice modeling, the biology, biometric choice modeling? The difference between them and the econometric modeling is that economists have imposed a utility function. And once a utility function is imposed, it means that the equation has become behavioral. In other words, the distinguishing feature is that there is behavior in econometrics. Having said that one, I think I can now begin to jump to please you and to say that econometrics model now led to disaggregate models. The first model that I explained before were aggregate models. But econometric models will lead you to disaggregate models. What are disaggregate models? Disaggregate models are the ones that are based on individual rather than very large areas and online. Simply put, the advantage of disaggregate models are written here. They have a strong behavioral background. They use a relatively limited amount of data, and they are responsive to policy issues. Madam Vice Chancellor, what I've described so far relates to passenger transportation. We also did a lot of work. In fact, we did more work in the area of freight transportation. 80% of my work is on freight transportation. And I'm going to add here that because you are in maritime, you will be wondering what is the relevance of freight. Freight is the soul of maritime transportation. You call it, maritime may call it cargo. The business of maritime is freight. They carry goods mostly. They carry passengers, but in a limited manner. This will be of enormous interest to you. There's no time now, but we cannot avoid a particular freight transportation study that I did. I've said here that the demand for transport or freight transportation is very complex. You cannot analyze that demand using the conventional price and income relationship. No. You have to resort to other values that take into account of the person shipping the goods, the characteristics of the goods being shipped, the characteristics of the mode carrying them, and then Even in some cases, when you read my theory in future, the characteristics of even the agent, we call them freight forwarders. You have to include all these things into a freight model. So, Madam Vice Chancellor, the first freight model I want to draw your attention to is what I describe as a quasi-ideal freight demand function. We investigated the structure of transport demand there, and we think that it is a quasi-ideal freight demand function that we estimated. The ideal demand function is assumed, of course, to be downward sloping, continuous, non-linear, and homogeneous of degree 0. This means that if prices and income are multiplied by a constant, the quantity demanded under the ideal demand function remains unchanged. This is a very, very interesting quality to work with for scientists, that you can predict this. We estimated a comprehensive freight equation for freight transport demand. I want to revisit them, and I believe that we did very many interesting things. All the econometric tests, specifications, and all those, they were all imposed as regards science, as regards quantity, as regards the degree of multicollinearity, and so on. At that time, when that study was done, we did not have a threshold of saying that, yes, this is acceptable or unacceptable multicollinearity value. So I had argued then for the 1986 that in the absence of this threshold, it was sufficient to just inspect the multicollinear matrix, and building from that inspection, even if you found a slightly high degree of multicollinearity, the equation can be accepted, can still be accepted, provided, especially when you are using it for prediction. I'm happy to say that long after this, as I began to do research on this, I discovered that some values, there are now some threshold values of unacceptable multicollinearity. And I want to draw everybody's attention to it, that to investigate multicollinearity, the presence of which could be detrimental to the equation as a whole, you have to look at variance inflection factor, VIF, to see whether it is still acceptable. Another one we look at is the tolerance, the limit of tolerance of that index. Then the third one is the condition index. If you lay hold on this dimension, you see the values that will give you acceptable or unacceptable. But I want to say something about this particular research. I think that every student or every person who is aspiring to do econometrics in Nigeria must. My students have told me that it is a classic, and my junior colleagues, and I think it is a classic. It obeys all the rules of econometrics, and I recommend that you read them. I'm going to be fast from now on. The next stage set enters models, the models of Richard, models of transport demand, and so on. The models I'm going to mention now are not literature review models. The models are inventions of photo, myself. We classify those models and say, these are the models. And we are publishing them elsewhere without challenge. The first model is allocation model of transport research. They're pressing me. So the second model, under this first model of allocation of transport research, what have we done? We have used discriminant analysis to investigate transport demand. Discriminant analysis looks like, is the difference between discriminant analysis and regression model is that. Whereas regression models, we just assume a distribution, find fixed parameters and all those. Discriminant analysis has no such fixed parameters. You use discriminant analysis, you define an index or some series of indices. You are able to assign freight or passengers onto some modes depending on how your relationship with those indices. In other words, you define an index and you begin to assign. That is why discriminant analysis was the first method that was used in estimating modal choice. But this popularity soon waned and is no longer used when it was discovered that you cannot interpret associate behavior with it. You can only use it as a classification model to say that this group of people belongs to people who could possibly use this type of transport and so on and so forth. So, but it is not yet abandoned. Because they are pressing me on, I will no longer go to say in future I will come to discriminant. So, what transformation? Madam Vice Chancellor, it is important to see, I'm not just reviewing them so that we can laugh. I'm trying to say discriminant analysis have been transformed in various ways. Now we have some forms of different analysis that have been for linear programs. So we have linear programming related discriminant analysis. And when we have those linear programming discriminant analysis, it now begins to resemble the data development analysis, which is based on linear programming. And therefore, I am now compared to jump to discriminant, environment, data development analysis. But I don't think I ought to join. I don't think I ought to join. Madam Vice Chancellor, please don't pay. Why cannot jump this? This is a work of so much and a work of so many years. I'm not even somewhere I will tell you all these ones were done by me. My students, my colleagues sitting here, have done a lot of work. They cannot come here and not hear what they did. So I won't jump. The next section is behavioral choice model. Behavioral model. And then the next one is the full distribution model, followed by the derived demand models. When you are at home, read the theory, because I showed you now I did some theoretical work. The theoretical work I did is mostly under the full distribution model. And you can see how we involve the framework of the theory of the shipper, the theory of the receiver, and so on. And we now come to mention the derived demand models. Under the derived demand models, a very important concept comes up, which I must remark. But But I'm going to permit me to go back a bit. Under the, no, I won't go to this. There's the investigating choice model. We have two important concepts. One is the concept of exemption. We are looking at deriving from rational value, choice item. And then you have the equivalent of choice item deriving from the law of comparative judgment. I will meet those who propose them. Answer of choice. And you cannot do any business without mentioning answer of choice. It is something like this. Of course, everybody knows that given two options, you weigh the option, and then you choose one that is likely to maximize your gain. When you have two binary something, binary options, and you are putting an assumption of choice, you have to make an assumption. And that assumption is the assumption of independent of independent. That somebody acknowledging your symptom, they will not be able. That's not the able. So essential characteristics we enable you. That has been mathematized. That has been you know what we call the UA assumption. UA assumption is very, very important. So bear in mind the critical role of agents of choice in any kind of choice. It applies also to the choice making in whatever it is. Well, we have made choices here in this room relates to not only the choice of ordinary category, but also the choice that people make in thoughts selection. When she has said it, they have to make choice whether it will be this or not. That is why we are investigating analytic data model. The analytic data modeling that we have investigated. It's intelligent from custom law of comparative trade. I've already explained it and so on. Now, we also have a different set of choice apart from analytical data. We have a model. The model is a relation by aspect model. Now, when you want to choose something, you weigh the characteristics. Weigh the characteristics of the thing you want to choose. And then you begin to eliminate the word that you don't want until you arrive at the manner. The interesting thing is the method by which that choice is different. But the advantage of looking at it now, by analytics, choice already, or choice selection, factor choice selection, and then you have the model. There will be a relationship. And what there's no relation. It's very like the model. And we put various conditions on the something. Can we make something value? Yes. We said that we can make some value of that thing. And it is not contained here. Now compare the model with the analytic, and then we can increase some of the other models by combining them. I have also now I've measured earlier on. I said some models do not have a defined mathematical structure. Such models are the statistical models, survey quality models. I encountered them especially when I came to school. I did not know about them, but I encountered them. That is when you have to judge perception. and acceptance. So ask people question. Ask them what are they expecting and what are they experiencing now. And then you use the gap between their perception and their expectation to say that the savings that they have gotten is satisfactory or not. Being that I just came from a civil engineering background, I want them to have that and get that in perspective. There is, the issue is accepting very lot for self alone, and that they're not very different. We can now begin to talk of the most important thing of our problem, and that is the investigation of productivity and efficiency in the transport sector. We have investigated productivity in ports. We have investigated productivity in the airports using multiple methods. We have used percent of productivity, in the productivity clear, even in very good journals. People confuse productivity and efficiency, even in very tough journals. No, there is a difference. I can't go away from here without saying there is a difference between productivity and efficiency. If productivity is related, talking of the relationship between input and output. But then efficiency, talking of the nature of change. Maritime is I went to the University of Federal University of Technology, FUTA, and I asked the class when I went for accreditation, I said, "Can you explain productivity? What do you mean from that?" And they were able to distribute productivity and every engineer, every professional, every economist should be able to distinguish between a ratio and a rate. Efficiency is a ratio. Productivity is a ratio. We can investigate whether in a given transport system, the productivity is it embodied productivity or disembodied productivity? Some of the work we have done use using development analysis. Development analysis doesn't have parameters. So we're able to say that there is a decreasing rate of return, or there is an increasing rate of return, or that the rate of return is constant. That's what we are able to say. But you cannot say precisely much more than that. But if you study stochastic structure analysis, if you use stochastic structure analysis, you can answer some of those questions. We have used stochastic to investigate productivity in the agency. We have used to investigate productivity. I invite you to look at it, and then I can now go to the final section. This final section is very interesting. There is something new that we have done, and it has to do with allocation. The method of fair, how do you allocate resources? And what do you do? Thank you for clarifying myself. I'm talking many things to be able to get to that. Now, transport allocation, cost allocation. We have done cost allocation models in the highways. How do you allocate costs to highways? You notice that usually people will complain that the heavy lorries are energy, and we want to, according to the degree of damage that they do. How do we estimate that? Another way of looking at the social today is 2 or 3 groups of people want to compete. Their cooperation under a system. How can it lead to a general welfare? In other words, how can it increase if the fact that cooperation increase individual welfare, but the general welfare? So two things are being done. How do we allocate costs aside? If an agent is the source of cost, how do we make that agent to get the cost and another one, when individuals a group decide to cooperate, how can we ensure the maximization of the welfare of the group? And to be able to do that in chapter 6, we investigated the of game theory. Because we cannot do it and what I just described. And I said, I'm giving the using of game theory. Yes, and in trying to do the key thing of game theory, that you formalize these individual behaviors, whether they're trying to cooperate to maximize their welfare, or whether we're going to compute the cost imposed by individuals. You formalize them in such a way on top linear program. What are the time you need to take that program? This is just interest to everybody. Because you can see costs, different costs are going to, and they cooperate. If they cooperate, we're saying that using game theory and the system of linear program, you can improve, you can arrive at the situation where the general welfare of everybody, every individual, and then the general welfare of the public is also good. We use mostly values or administrative value to determine this. There is a little mathematics that we do there, but that's what I just described. So thank you. You read the final thing. You read the final thing. I have to say to read the whole conclusion because it shows you something, and it is that the research that we have done itself including some of many as again the right from the essential concept of the isomorphisms. The other concept of the law of comparative judgment, and then the concept of duality. Duality means that there is a duality between the function and the promoter. There is a duality between the profit function and the revenue function. Which is what we do that in any situation you can achieve the maximum either by minimizing cost or by maximizing utility or satisfaction. Or if the equation between fusion increment behavior and you know the profit function, you can derive the equivalent cost function. So this one is so very important that you cannot end the labor that you must mention choice and you must mention the law of comparative and then the one with so I have 1 minute and the method is over. I said, I saw the market law money ahead. I need to go ahead and read it to end the lecture. I will really look much for it. Okay, maybe I can't really find it. I I thought you can't help me to get to the last point now. What I was trying to say, and I keep saying, is that the concept, those concepts that I mentioned are so very important. I won't be happy if I don't read. You know what I think I see it. As you are not talking, I saw it. But as you conclude this lecture with a remarks on two important notions that have fundamentally influenced the history of thought in the field of my research enterprise. These are the aspect of choice and the concept of duality. The item of choice concerns the theory of decision making. In the same way, the concept of a limit has influenced the argument in calculus or continuous mathematics. The loose item of choice and the total law of operating judgment noted earlier have significant implications for modeling modal choice, surface transportation, and installation projects in maritime and aviation concern. Both concepts relate to the mathematical action of choice. The loose item of choice includes the property of independence from irrelevant alternatives, which states that the probability of choosing an option is unaffected by the presence of other options. The two economies, as earlier discussed, the debate on the polynomial public choice model, which has been exploited in our transport research. On the other hand, Dawson's law of comparative judgment states that individuals make decisions based on fair comparison between options. If given right to the random utility model, meaning that the utility of each option is a random variable, and the probability of choosing an option depends on each utility relating to others. The influence of Dawson's law is present in many areas of the real world, including analytic hierarchy method in our approach. The concept of duality is extremely significant in multiple fields of modern economic analysis, including macroeconomics, development theory, welfare economics, and econometrics. It refers to the idea that an economic product can often be studied from two equivalent perspectives, namely a primary problem, which is the direct optimization problem, and a dual problem, an alternative optimization problem that use essentially the same result. This has been argued in many fronts of our research. There is a duality between utility maximization and expenditure maximization. This allows the derivation of the one behavior without direct solving utility maximization problem. The same system mentioned in a part research emerged from this dual approach. Our productivity research is trying to duality between the productive function and the cost function, and also the duality between the function and the cost function. The economic assessment of efficiency and productivity of transport operations. Another case lastly, in the arena of cost allocation studies, between safety and safety governance and both, we have noted that the equivalence between theoretic optimality and linear programming quality provides theoretical for using optimization to allocate such resources more computing elements. In this context, in the context of our project, the theoretical of fair sharing of goals and how actually goals of fair life using material handlers. I'm not going to say thank you. When I approached the budget for the opportunity to view this area, I explained that the major motivation for the meeting is to encourage our younger colleagues in order to bring research scholars to enter the training field of transport modeling. I thank the Professor Flora to the Manefa to work in for their approval to give the lecture and for encouragement in starting the public lecture series. The support from the people of the University of the Shop, the support the plenty meeting. And very important. My gratitude goes to the committee of friends who manage the logistics of this lecture, including this publication. In this process, I should thank especially the University Librarian, Dr. Fatima, the Village Librarian, the Deputy Librarian of Academy, Engineer Professor Johnny Waller. The other members of the committee share my gratitude to Associate Professor Wobioma, Dr. Julius Ayana, Dr. Henry Nema, Dr. Daniel Edora. I'm going to the former committee members of these publications and public lecture series. They were appointed before the British acknowledgement, but I sincerely thank them because I know that yesterday they joined the committee of informal to provide a front and assisted us from that time on. So I say, with you, it's a prayer of my exact and interpretation of each encounters, along with fellow passengers and crew members who collaborated in the research described. The co-researchers are mostly former undergraduate or postgraduate students who share my vision of completing research activities grounded in theory. Among the research collaborators, especially acknowledge the roles of Professor Kalisu, Professor Professor Bobola Stevens, Associate Professor Obioma Mobe, Professor Victor Mobe, Associate Professor Investigate, Victor Shimon. Containing important codes for the computation of the touch model in the 1980s, long before the existing software in the field became available. Themselves. We wrote every aspect of the thing. But it's very easy now. This development was predicted even long before it happened. Finally, I am grateful to my long life friend, Pat. For her inspiration, and I mean it, for her inspiration and continuous encouragement. Thank also everybody that has been here, gathered here. And then I just remember my authority. So I said, praise the Lord. So,
thank you very much, Professor Ogude, for this thought-provoking lecture titled Modeling Transport. There is no doubt that this lecture will add value to the Nigerian transport system. Was well delivered by the erudite scholar. Thank you very much once again. Before I will come on the vice chancellor to present the elections to the national. They are advised Professor Kalutu Siri to take the pass on the election and election. Professor. The vice chancellor. Principal officers of the university. The public lecture. My remark is, there is a man who drafted me passport and taught me the mess of transport teaching and research. I drank from his fountain of knowledge. And he told me to walk in that place. I became the first professor in progress. Thank you. I remember, you know, so the next in 1958 at the Nigerian Stock Market. He said that coming to work, you hear the comment of transport money. Please come and join me. We've not met before. Say, come and join me. When you can establish the post-graduate studies, we have 4 pioneers. That small city, the planted then, has grown now into a big forest. We finish there at home on the progress of that city. You can see the environment. No matter where we not go. That's why we are there. And as it was talking, you see the making hand like this. And now drinking the water from Father. As he was speaking, as if he was talking to us. That was what he did. It's fine that at the point he was God discussing, not using it. And that is what we need to do. By laying this foundation here today, this is a missing link. As the transport is missing. It has been carried over. And we can step together during a week. Yes. And it's not that transport, as you see, can be modeled. And the model basically of working practice. That is what my organ has told us. You can model transfer. And you can capture the behavior of all the other stakeholders in transfer. And you can put them in different with the right comment. And tell them, when is that all policy issues? We have somebody in the person of Professor. And normally, right of pseudo days, you cannot show Professor the doesn't want to hear. At the point I want to be people from say where are you going? I mean this one. Professor. Say where are you going? Stay here. That is here. Don't go out. That is here. Don't go out. And pray friends and everybody. When the prof was presented, I can look at this in the lab press. Listen to the lecture. Nothing was this year. I'm very much for giving my thank you. May the good Lord and welcome. Having prepared and the I know you prepared this. But that I will give a total 100,000. Not only me, there are some systems between us. I want to say here that when Prof was having this photo, I walked into his office. He said, Peter, you know your father has no job. I said, yes. He said, we don't need to beg anybody that get me and see. I mean, it's not too clear that put that. My family. Yes, other juniors. I said, this is more. I think more for us. Because when we look at you, we are motivated. When we look at you, we are inspired to work. When we look at your work, we read it and say, here is the man who is talking classroom. And we will support him talking classroom. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Very much, Professor. Good to see the Professor of Calculation from Futo. At this point, I want to invite the Vice Chancellor to present the lecture gifts to the lecturer. But I Vice Chancellor.
Before I present the gifts to Professor Okude, I want to thank once again all our invitees, our traditional rulers, his representatives, the professors and lecturers from Puto. I want to appreciate all our staff that are here. The registrar will take the vote of thanks. On my own part, I want to appreciate everyone. But guess what? Most especially from Obude's wife, Professor. You're from mine. You know, what brought me to this university the second time? It was the first year in 2018 as the Deputy Vice Chancellor Academy. I was here for 1 year, after which I went back to the Federal University of Agriculture, Abeokuta. And I came back the second time. Also, Bude has been so wonderful. He's so humble despite his age. He will say, Vice Chancellor, man. Me is humility. It is painful that he's to go now, but he has reproduced himself in the likes of Professor Ige and others seated here. That is my only consolation. That this brain, this talent, is not just retired, but he has reproduced himself. If you have not yet reproduced yourself, it is pathetic. You have to reproduce yourself in your fellow students, in your who are now his colleagues. So, if we want anything in transport, we can. In fact, Professor Ibe was part of the team sent by NUC to our school for the PG school verification. And that is a one over your students to examine you. It is all done, dusted and done. So we are very, very excited in the person of Professor Chuka Innocent. We have a trophy here for you, sir.
Thank you very much. Please come to give the vote of thanks for this election. First and foremost, we wish to thank God Almighty for bringing me to this public election and also created a level environment for the election to take place. I want to thank the Vice Chancellor, Professor Flora for graciously approving this election. So thank the guest lecturer for a job well done, Professor Innocent today. So thank the Deputy Vice Chancellor, Kennedy, Professor Power, the Provost of the main campus, Professor Marwellen, the principal officers, Dr. Mrs. Abian, the bursar, possibly our traditional ruler, His Royal Majesty, Ogoro Baran II, the parent of our Kingdom, for also sending Aishis to great dislocation. Our professor from Futu, Professor Inde, and others from Futu, the University Council members present here, Senate members present here, we express our gratitude. The banks, the University Bank for us who choose the media and the students here present, we earnestly express our gratitude to you for hosting this occasion. We got to give you the environment to return to your. Okay. Please, permit me to recognize Dr. Franklin Yu, Chairman, Senior Staff Association of Nigeria University, Photographs, the most welcome. We pray God to grant you safe journey back to your previous destinations. At the close of this section, the national anthem will be taken, then there will be a procession to the front of the same building, where there will be a good photograph. Then invited guests should go to the same chamber for refreshments. I want to thank the organizing committee for the job well done. The ceremonial committee, our final committee in the university, led by Professor Weston Ekion, and also the committee that joined them to organize this program led by Dr. Nigeria. Thank you very much for job well done. So at this point, the bank will take the national anthem, then there will be a closing procession back to the slave building. Thank you all. Yes, in the order of the anthems, the other one anthem will come, and the national anthem will come. First time, please. First time. Those of us moving to the same chamber, including the issues and other delegates from Futu. Thank you.
Life